Well, I think there was messages for us, and there were messages for the public in America, especially their constituents, really. So this was two sides. I mean, I think for me, every time I hear this European bashing, it's very in fashion right now. So I'm thinking of what is the alternative, and really, I mean, all the best or good things that we have gotten from Europe, and all the good things that Europe actually presents. When I go around the world, I see, countries looking at us because we are representing, the values that still are high. I mean, we are, pushing humanity forward, trying to, defend human rights and all this, which is actually bringing also prosperity for people. So that's why, it's very hard for me to believe these accusations. Coming from a country that is number 2 in the press freedom index, hearing criticism regarding press freedom coming from a country that is 58 on this list, it's interesting.
So the speech, you interpret it as a mixed message, but were you relieved by it? Or you say, actually, it was just nicer, more polite, but the fundamental point still stayed?
No, I think the message that we heard from there is that America and Europe are intertwined, have been in the past and will be in the future. I think this is important. It is also clear that we don't see eye to eye in all the issues, and this will remain the case as well. But I think we can work from there.
Thank you for that, President. Your take, and I don't want to spend too much time on Marco Rubio because we need to talk about Europeans and what we need to do, but it's important to understand the assessment. Yesterday, it seemed to me immediately after there was a form of relief. He did talk about destinies that are intertwined, and as the day went on and that speech was sort of interpreted in more detail, you see mass migration, check, repressive speech, check. West that outsourced value chains and supply chains and now is weaker, check. A lot of that looks like the speech that J.D. Vance gave here, and we were here a year ago, and people were shocked. So again, what do you make of the status quo now between the US and Europe?
Well, first of all, I'm a historian, so I like the speech because there were so many historic references. But seriously, I've been at Munich security conferences many times. Actually, I was in this room when Mr. Putin was making his 2007 speech. That shocked, but at some point we did not realize that this is the new foreign policy program of the Russian Federation. Only when time passed by we have seen that. On our relationship, first of all, frankly, I was not very shocked last year when the Vice President was delivering his speech, and when we speak about Secretary Rubio's speech, frankly, I liked many points he made. Number one, I think that the commitment to transatlantic relationship is there. Acknowledgement, and that's number two, that we are going to have some profound differences we have to sort out was also there. But let's face it, we have had those cases also in the past. When Iraq war started, there was no kind of whole agreement between European allies and the United States. Number three, yes, like it or not, but migration issue is becoming a hot potato in many of European countries. So those are also things that I think we need to take into account. But one thing that I think, and here I agree with both of you, we tend to talk a lot about speeches that are presented from the outside of Europe. What we need to do is to speak about what Europe must do to become stronger. And here I have 3 points. Hope is not a method or strategy. I think that we need the calm pragmatism to carry on with our things that we have agreed to do a long time ago: defense, digital sovereignty, and also energy independence. Those are 3 things, if we really want to get Europe strong, we need to do. And finally, I think that we all understand that strong Europe is of our own interest, of our allies, but strong Europe is not something that our adversaries want to see. And when we talk with some people, they don't want to see Europe at the table and to speak with European representatives. They want to speak with individual representatives, and that's the point.
Just as a very quick follow-up, because you listed the items that Europe needs to be strong yesterday, nonetheless, and we're going to move on from the speech, I promise. The U.S. Secretary, however, he did say our relationship goes beyond the economics and the trade. It is cultural and it is spiritual too, in a way. Do you need to have full alignment for this relationship to work on those different points? Or do you go, no, an independent Europe is inevitably going to clash, but we can still manage that relationship?
But then I have a point. Look at Europe. We are very different. We have Hungary, we have, let's say, the French-Italian model, we have the Baltics or Nordics, and there is not a great, how to say, unity also in many cases back home. So it's what I would say, one of the profound bases of democratic and liberal order is that we agree to disagree, that we have different points, and sometimes the debate can be heated. But at the end of the day, what is important? To find a common ground. And I still hope that with all the differences, we can reform and transform transatlantic relations, but more based on the partnership rather than following. And that's our own fault that we were neglecting defense and other things for so long. And energy dependence of Europe on the Russian gas and oil was profound just a couple of years ago.
Well, thank you for that. Benjamin Haddad, on Friday, the French president was here and he spoke with Mr. Ambassador. He said, to a large degree, this idea of Europe bashing, it needs to stop and Europe needs to be proud of itself. And he also said this is a radical, innovative political project. He also said there's a caricatured version of Europe, which is, again, this idea of woke, migration. A lot of that was mentioned in the speech yesterday, but not to compare. But it seems to me right now, one of the takeaways from the conference is there are two different visions of what the West is and what the values are of the West. What is the pitch that you make, and how do you ensure that the rest of the world perhaps follows that model and not the model that Marco Rubio presented yesterday, which is hard power, but also being proud about what he called as a heritage that is now being shamed?
Yeah, to be frank, I think the fact that we have 4 Europeans asked to comment on the speech by the Americans is already part of the problem. And we should not either be relieved or shocked by this or that speech. And I think the worst lesson we could draw from this weekend is to say, well, I can cling to some love words that I heard in part of his speech and push the snooze button. No, I think Europeans should be a little like Marcus Aurelius, a little stoical, and take the external aspect as a neutral given and not attach any emotional dimension to it, and just focus on ourselves. Focus on what we can control. Focus on our rearmament, on the support for Ukraine and the threat that Russia poses to all of our democracies. Focus on competitiveness. Just the day before this conference, actually, we were with the heads of states and government in Liège to push the integration of our internal market, to push the investment into AI, quantum, space, cyber, to reduce our dependencies and the risk, as we see that the relationships we've had with partners are now weaponized as tools of influence and power. And yes, we should be proud of ourselves, and we should be proud of our model. Kaja said it very well in her introduction. We have countries today that are candidate to join the European Union, and they're reforming very deeply. Why? Because they know that this is also the best anchor for the rule of law, for liberal democracy, for prosperity. And you have protesters in certain countries that even get targeted because they're brandishing the European flag, because it's an aspiration for them. We can be proud of the fact that in the last 12 months, the bulk of support for Ukraine is provided by Europeans. I remember very well where we were here last year, and then a few days later, we had the Oval Office meeting between President Trump, Vice President Vance, and President Zelensky. And a lot of us in the commentary were saying, well, can Europeans continue the support for Ukraine on their own? And just in December, we agreed on a 90 billion euro package, military and economic support for Ukrainians to continue to give them the visibility to resist to the aggression. We're discussing right now the 20th sanctions package on energy, on the shadow fleet, to increase the pressure on Russia. There's still a lot to do, both on the economic front and on the military front. Let's focus on us. And I would just end here. I'm convinced that this is also the best way in the long run to reshape and maybe salvage the transatlantic relationship, to make it more balanced, more mature, with two pillars that are equal, rather than looking for love or thinking about how the Americans are going to talk about us.
Well, thank you for that. And in a second, we'll move over to Europe, of course, but perhaps, of course, the NATO angle now, because Benjamin Haddad just alluded to a relationship that perhaps is evolving to a more mature stage where it needs to be an equal partnership, and that means equal burden sharing. We've heard a lot about NATO 3.0. What does that mean?
Well, good morning, everyone. Let me say we saw the movie, the trailer for Munich Security Conference, and of course, as always, it's provocative, it's interesting, but what surprised me the most when I entered my room in the hotel was that also in the hotel rooms you have a picture of an elephant. I don't know whether you coordinated this with the hotel, but there is another picture in the hotel, and it's a giraffe. And I also thought it's a message from the Munich Security Conference that we do need to look forward to the challenges and the big picture from a slightly higher perspective. And what we all agree during these 3 days is that our security environment, the global security environment, has never been more complex, more contested, and more challenging. How do you deal with the complex and challenging security environment? By pulling all your strengths together. And this is our view, that EU, and actually not just the EU, but Europe and US and Canada can be both stronger and safer together. And we see this in NATO every day, because we have to deliver on these things both in peacetime and prosperity, but also in crisis and conflict. What was the call of your panel is actually what is happening. Europeans are stepping up. And it's not either or. We have to do both. We have to have European allies and Canada stepping up, but in the same time, we have to get our work done within NATO. Yesterday, I think also Secretary General mentioned this, the change in Europe and Canada is really breathtaking. I mean, look at Germany's number. In 2029, so 6 years ahead of the commitment in Hague, they will spend 152 billion euros on defense, 3.5, already there. It's double the amount that they have invested in security in 2021. A remarkable change, but also change is happening when you look at capabilities, contributions, and leadership. 7 out of 9 forward land forces of NATO are currently run by Europeans. And the recent decision to have actually 2 of our joint commands being now run by Europeans, by Italy and the UK, while US increases its commitment by having leadership in the 3 theater commands, this is something that sends the message. We can do both. We can have a stronger European pillar, we can have stronger European presence, stronger European leadership, but in the same time, we invest in the transatlantic cooperation because it gives us the action and the speed that we need.
And can I just ask us a follow-up question? Because in this Munich Security Conference yesterday, we also heard from the head of the Commission, and she said we need to instill life into a mutual defense clause within the EU treaties. On the Friday, the French president talked about a more holistic approach when it comes to nuclear deterrence. It seems to me that this is sort of a plan B. In life, when you put together a plan B, it means that you don't really trust that plan A is fully going to work. So is that sort of stepping up within NATO, or is that a reflection that, yes, there are doubts about the alliance?
What I decide every time when I come to the Munich Security Conference is not to interpret the words of those who were speaking before me. But let me say this. The investment that the US, Canada, and European allies, and when we talk European allies, now I look at my friend Levant, don't forget, Turkey, UK, Norway, all this is part of this effort to strengthen the alliance and to strengthen the European part of the alliance. We need the strong sides of NATO in order to deliver when needed. What we do well is command and control. What we do well are multi-domain operations. What we do well is actually having the ability to perform tomorrow. Look at the 3 things that we have done just in the course of the less than 12 months. Because of this power and because of this cooperation, we were able to immediately reinforce our eastern flank with one vigilant activity, Eastern Sentry. This is why we were able to deal with the events at the Baltic Sea and the threats towards our undersea infrastructure, Baltic Sentry. And this is why we were able to pull all our resources and have a new Arctic Sentry activity initiated by our Supreme Allied Commander, which was doing the right thing in the right time, because we had the capacity, we had the power, and we can take action. So this is why I don't think it's a question of one or the other. We have to do both, at least both, in the same time.
Well, thank you for that. Perhaps a question also for you, Madam Kallas. Again, going back to this idea of the weekend, the French president talked about this holistic approach. The head of the commission brought up Article 42.7. 5 years ago, nobody would have talked about this clause because that's what Article 5 is for. So is that a reflection of doubts in terms of this alliance, or is this a recognition that this is part of the process of Europe growing up?
We have 23 members who are also members of NATO, but not all members of European Union are members of NATO. So that's why we have also the 42.7. And of course, we need to have the discussions how these things really work together. But it shows that Europeans need to do more. We need to strengthen the European part of NATO, do it together with NATO. We have excellent cooperation, I think, and we are not duplicating. I think this is also very important because we can push the defense industry, come up with the initiatives that actually help our members that are common between NATO and European Union to also achieve their capability targets in NATO. So we are really trying to do that. And what we are also trying to do, which is a bit hard because defense has always been national competence. And we really need to push, Europeans to think European. I mean, the national defense ministers, but also all the layers, underneath to think European. I'll give you one example. One minister said, they have a big procurement, and then he asked his people who are doing the procurement, did you ask the other member states, whether you can join their agreements, you can do this together, and they hadn't. So we really need to change this. I think, meeting together also with the defense ministers more often is giving them the thinking, the European thinking, because we have too many, standards, we have too many different capabilities, and in order to bring down the costs, also bring down the procurement times, we need to really work together and not to have this, defend our own industry or, it's my national, but think regional, because the threat is actually European. So the answer should also be European.
And can I ask you, what's going to break that wheel then? Because it's been 2 years that we hear this. A commission job was created precisely for this, to make sure that there's a level of cohesiveness in procurement. We've heard this now for many months, but you say it's still a problem. What's finally going to break this wheel then?
No, I'm not saying it's totally lost cause. Actually, we have done a lot of work. We have the European Defense Agency that is helping also member states to do the joint procurement and push this forward. But actually, it starts from the thinking on the higher political level, that when you think in terms of defense, what am I doing with the money that I'm now spending under the NATO's 5% target, then it's not only how much we spend, but actually how to spend it more wisely. So this is the push that we have, and I would say that we are moving to this direction. What we also need is the cooperation from the defense industry side.
Well, thank you for that. And, since the High Representative mentioned higher political thinking, maybe I'll go to you, President, for that. When it comes just specifically, and I wonder if you've even thought about this in that kind of detail. Yesterday, again, when the head of the Commission says we need to instill life in this mutual defense clause, have you ever contemplated what that would mean? Because right now the definition is very blurry. Article 5 is very clear what it means. Attack on one is attack on all. How do you perceive a mutual defense clause for Europeans? What should be in it?
Well, I will start with a bit unusual answer. Ukraine. If Ukraine becomes EU member state, I think that clause is going to be a very, very real one, because Ukraine has now such a military capability, like it or not, most of our countries do not have. We have only one EU member state, and that's France, with nuclear capabilities. But I think that's a high strategic thinking. For me now, Ukraine's EU membership is not only about the traditional EU principle, but also about defense. Now about more detailed way. First of all, we have worked, and I think that here I want to say that Europe has moved very well on military mobility issues. We have still situation, but this is improving, that actually for one European army unit to cross the border of another country, you still need to fill some paperwork that you normally don't want to. It's almost like creating a military Schengen. That's one. Number two, I think that right now EU member states are more investing in dual use or actually military infrastructure. That is something that is really needed in case of crisis. Number three, I think that, and here High Representative can answer better, but we do have the EU Military Committee. We do have all those planning things. But we have been, particularly in Latvia, always very cautious that we do not duplicate NATO. Because that's important.
That's a bad idea. Duplication, you think, would be a bad idea?
We should not. We should use as much as we can. And here, I also think that the idea that Europeans are taking more military command posts is a good one, because that actually increases this kind of military planning, operational awareness, and anything else. Should we have European army? That's a great question, but I always ask the counter question, what do we understand by the European army? Do we understand standing corps, divisions, I don't know, armies that can move, or we understand better planning, better execution, better joint exercises, and so on. That's where, frankly, I have been always skeptical about putting a political slogan, but then having completely different answers what we understand.
So this stage, the idea of a European army, and I insist on this, the Spanish foreign minister also brought it up again yesterday. You think at this point it's more of a concept than anything you've ever discussed in serious detail?
Well, frankly, I've been foreign minister for 12 years. I started back in 2011 when the world looked completely different, and I ended when Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2022. My question then is, we tried to create, and I think they still exist on paper, European battle groups. On paper they are, in reality, try to mobilize those. If we go that way, then probably, yes, we can try to figure out the way how we can create the mechanism that helps in times of crisis. We have a very good example with UK present, and UK actually in the leading role, Joint Expeditionary Force. That's actually covering more or less the Baltic region. That probably could be a role model also for expanding. But then again, if European army is just like US army or the national army, I think then we need to go into completely different understanding of the European Union, with completely different decision-making process, with completely different political structure. Actually, then we are talking about the federal Europe. Whether we are ready for that, well, I don't think that in all 27 member states we are ready for that.
We're going to talk about that in detail in a second. Madam.
No, on this, I think we should not really lose time on the things that we really need to do, which is actually strengthening our defense. Every European country has an army, and 23 of those are also armies of NATO. So the force is comprised of all these armies. You don't have a separate NATO army, but it's comprised of these armies. So if we have the talks of the European army, then my ask and my question is always, do you mean that Germany's establishing a separate army in addition to that army that is already in NATO? I don't think so. I'm seeing the talks that are about the conscription issue in Germany, and it's not easy. So I don't think it's going to be easy to establish a new one. And then, of course, if you do, then the question is, how does that work with the army if you don't establish a new army? And you have one army that is simultaneously in the European army as well as in NATO. Then the problem is that when it is really a crisis, it is all about the chain of command. Who gives orders to whom? How does it function? So if you have two of these where the army actually belongs to, then in terms of crisis, it falls in between, and this is extremely dangerous. So my call would be, let's not use our time in talking about new things when we have to focus on what is really urgent right now, which is strengthening our armies, doing it together in a European way, so that we also strengthen the European pillar in NATO.
So it's a form of magical thinking at this point, to some extent. Minister Haddad, I know you have to leave very soon, but I have to ask you a question, perhaps to clarify. The French president this week, again, repeated, and this is a quote, Europeans are crazy at times. They spend all this money to subsidize industries in other countries. There should be a very strong and clear European preference. And he also brought up the idea of, the Eurobonds. Let's just say the word is not that terrible. So joint borrowing to pay for these things. Maybe it's early in the morning for it, but I just want to ask you to clarify, because he also said when you hear a French guy say protection of Europe, it looks like protectionism to some. So what does a European preference really mean?
Well, first, maybe to react to a couple of things that were said, we have NATO that France is an active part of, and clearly a strengthened European security to have Sweden and Finland join NATO in the last couple of years. And we have missions of reassurance in the Baltic states, in Poland, and Romania. We need to invest much more at the European level, because we mentioned the duplication, the fragmentation, and just our shortages, our dependencies. And I think the model that we adopted with SAFE last year is an interesting one, because basically you list all the areas, cyber, drone, ammunition, long-range strike, air defense, where you have shortages, and you incentivize through funding European states and companies to cooperate together cross-border to be able to invest and procure in the next few years. And I think that's something we really need to accelerate. We need to accelerate it, of course, with national funding, but also with funding from the multi-annual financial framework that we're discussing right now, where we really need an ambitious budget when we look at the investment gaps in defense and security, in space, in AI, in quantum, all these areas where we need to massively invest. And if you look at the Draghi report, all these numbers are well known, right? Both in private and public investment, we're lacking about 800 billion a year if we want to make up with the United States. That will demand both public and private fund. And public fund, of course, to use as a sort of leverage for private funding. And this is why it's a common sense proposal to go look at borrowing on the markets. When you do it at 27 level, by the way, you have an interest rate discount.
Cheaper.
It's cheaper. And this shouldn't be a taboo. We did it literally 2 months ago for Ukraine. When I was talking about the 90 billion euro loan for Ukraine, it's borrowing on the market. SAFE is the European Commission borrowing on the market and then loaning to member states at a preferential rate as well. So this is a financial procedure. The other possibility will go to look for the national budgets directly. So this is what the president has been talking about when he talks about Eurobonds, is basically say there's an urgency, we need to invest, we need to increase our capabilities, support our innovators, our entrepreneurs, our industry, and let's do it by borrowing. Now, the other thing I would say on European preference, here again, it's also common sense. As you tell people, we are going to support an increased budget on defense. We did it in France, and all neighbors are doing it. Germany, of course, is doing it. Over the 2 terms of the Macron presidency, we'll have doubled the defense spending of France. And we're doing it at a time, to be frank, where we're also cutting spending on other areas. How can you tell your population, we're going to increase the defense budget, we're going to cut elsewhere, and then it's going to subsidize a factory in Kentucky? This makes no sense. And beyond that, look at the question about the control of use, the control of export, the technological know-how. All of this is critical. We know that when you buy a weapon from another area, it comes with strings attached. It comes with fine prints on how and when you can use it. So all of this is absolutely critical. And by the way, it shouldn't be a taboo either. Look at not the Trump administration, the Biden administration. They did the Buy America Act. They did the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a massive subsidy program within the United States, either for US companies or for outside companies that were reshoring, that were investing manufacturing in the United States. We should be open. We should trade with the rest of the world and diversify. But there's 2, I think, clear criteria. Number 1, you want to have a level playing field. And so when you have other partners that are also protecting or subsidizing, you want to be able to do the same. And number 2, on critical areas of sovereignty, of national security, and this is not just defense, by the way, because when I'm talking about AI or even payment systems, you want to reduce your dependencies or de-risk, as we say. On all these areas, you need your champions. You need your European champions. And by the way, and I've met a lot of them just in the last 3 days, we have the innovators, we have the entrepreneurs, we have the people who are ready to take the risk. Let's just give them the tools to go to scale, to conquer the world, to compete with the Chinese and the Americans, and to build the European sovereignty of tomorrow.
And I know you have to go, but just to be more specific, since the panel is about a plan of action from the Europeans, everything that you say, this breakthrough, will this happen before the summer? Because again, the French president said either there's a breakthrough in June, and it's a full package for Europe, and that also means joint borrowing, or we're going to do it in a smaller coalition. Is that the deadline? Because ultimately, if not, this is just a debate that goes on and on.
No, you're completely right. I think we have to be very agile on the formats. Of course, it makes sense to have initiatives at the 27 level. And this is also how we've built the European Union for a long time. Even when you look at the Eurozone or Schengen, you can have a group of countries that decide to move forward, to build a structured cooperation, or even to work with countries that are like-minded partners outside the European Union. When we did the coalition of the willing on Ukraine to work on the security guarantees for the day after a ceasefire, but also to support Ukraine today. Of course, we do it with the United Kingdom. This is a major strategic partner and is very convergent on our values and worldviews.
Specifically, if I may, just very briefly, what the market wants to see is Germany on board on this. They don't want to see a smaller coalition of France with a number of other countries. They want to see Germany on this. Do you think this can happen by June?
You have to ask Germany and the other partners, but I think it's in everyone's interest that we can move forward on this. But just to finish on this, the coalition of the willings on Eurobonds, you're right, but on everything, when we're talking about capital markets union, the 20th regime in corporate law, I think it makes a lot of sense to have a group of like-minded countries move forward together. And let's think also about how we associate countries like the UK, like Norway, like Canada, and a lot of initiatives that Europeans are taking, like we did with the coalition of the willing on Ukraine.
Well, thank you for that. I know you have to catch a flight, so thank you for joining us. And Madam Sakarinska, I know you also have to catch a flight, but let me just ask you a final question. There's been a lot of debate around Europe and what to buy and not to buy. How much time do you spend? Thank you very much, of course. Just very briefly, how much time do you spend thinking at NATO? Who's buying what? Are these weapons Europeans? Are they from the US? Or is that a non-debate within? And do you understand the points that the French minister just stated?
One of the 3 deliverables from the Hague summit last year was not just spend more or invest more. That was the thing that caught most of the headlines because it's a number and it's round and it's 5 and it's high. But actually the other key messages was we need to continue supporting Ukraine. And the third one was we need to produce more. And our call throughout all this year, and this will be repeated in Ankara now, is we need to produce more, and we need to produce more everywhere. I mean, we need more European production. We also need more production on the US side. And actually, if you look at the numbers, and especially if you look at the numbers on key capabilities, which are urgent in Ukraine, like air defense, we don't have enough, period. Not on one side or the other side of the Atlantic. This is why we will continue to say that we need to boost our defense production quickly. It's a question of urgency. Time is a cost. Several ministers have mentioned this. And this is why we believe the less barriers we have, the more we will produce. This is why some of the European countries actually went out and had contracts with some of our partners in the Indo-Pacific. It makes sense. So the focus is on actually making the links between our strong defense companies on both sides of the Atlantic easier. When we were discussing the Pearl, the model for support of Ukraine, we went to all allies, European, Canada, we told them, please, you have something in your stockpiles, you have interceptors, you have missiles, please, this is the moment to give them to Ukraine. You saw the pictures, you saw the numbers yesterday. Unfortunately, most of our stockpiles are not up to the task. And we went to industry, we can procure also. The only place where these capabilities were available was in the US stockpiles. And when you look, I was in Norway recently, I visited a company that does all of its export to the US. And then the US does additional production, and then many of European countries buy it. These are the links that defense companies have developed. If we try to dismantle them, we end up weaker and not stronger. So the call in the Ankara summit will be very much, we need to produce more, and for this, we need better regulation, we need speedier processes, and this is very much where NATO focuses on how do we make interoperability standard, how do we make the standards even stronger, and how do we make sure that the acquisition processes are speedier and smarter. So this is why you will hear a lot about innovation elements in the procurement and taking some element of risk, because this will not be risk-free, of course.
But just very briefly, since you mentioned the Pearl, at the time, it was controversial in Europe with a number of countries saying it's the Europeans that are paying for the weapons. The Europeans are paying now for Ukraine. Why is all this money going into the US industry? Are you saying in a time of urgency, that debate is a false debate?
I saw the photos yesterday. I was in Kiev at the end of November. We need to save the thermal plant tonight. And for this, as President Zelensky was saying, sometimes he has few hours. So again, I use the platform to make this call. Whoever has air defenses, we talk to partners, even partners are contributing to this, NATO partners. Whoever has the interceptors, whoever has the missiles, Ukraine needs them more than we do. So I don't think that here the big debate is which stockpile or which factory is this coming from.
Let's talk about Eurobonds. Of course, major economies should be on board. If we talk about European defense, each and every country first start to spend more. The average spending last year, I think it was Secretary General Rutte who was counting in Europe, outside, not the United States counting, was around 2%. We are striving for 5%. We have to do this for homework for our own rather than for pleasing someone else outside of Europe. But I think that we are coming to the point where, yes, because we can't agree on many things, because there is always one or two countries blocking that or another decision, that there is going to be emergence of some formats, which is good. But if we go too far, then we can get into the fragmentation of European Union. And I think that's where we still need to find a proper way. Also the regional formats, Nordic-Baltic cooperation, now with Finland and Sweden being NATO members, is just thriving. The support for Ukraine is thriving. But again, I think that we will have to, at one point, to look at all those formats and to understand where we go. And that's why I was alluding that we have also European top officials that can do work for Europe more and better if they are allowed. I have a sympathy for High Representative. I was 12 years in the Foreign Affairs Council, and sometimes I have a feeling that we were the unruly class of children with different preferences, and then comes the teacher and tries to get everyone together, and that's not an easy task at all. And that's only on the foreign policy level. I'm not talking about other things.
It's very...
I would come back to the poll I mentioned in my speech, and this is that the majority of Europeans, like it was 80% something, want Europe that is stronger on the global sphere. So how are we stronger on the global sphere? It's only when we are united. Then we are really a superpower. Now, the question is how to achieve this, because it's also true that it's becoming increasingly difficult. We have 27 countries, 27 democracies with their own domestic political issues, and that is really making it more difficult. Now, coalitions of the willing have been good start for a lot of good things in Europe. I mean, if you think about Schengen, if you think about Eurozone, Benjamin also mentioned this. You know, in the start, it was a coalition of the willing. Something built was coming out of this. But on the question of federalization, I come back to the time when I was running for the European Parliament in 2014, and I remember these talks at that time. And, you know, I remember also meeting the people and asking, like, do you want a banking union? Yes. Do you want, you know, that Europe does this? Now it's also that, you know, defense union. And then actually, if you ask in the end, do you want the federal Europe? Then they say no. But actually answering to all those questions is that you actually think about, you know, having a federal Europe. So the federalization is the word is really toxic, I think, is also in our public debate. But the point being that actually if we need to do these things together in order to be stronger on the global sphere, then we need to find ways of our decision making. And of course, it also requires political courage to either use the rules or you know, change the rules. And that's why, but I think the urgency is actually there, that we get our act together, that we also are able to take decisions to project unity.
And just briefly, before we open the floor to questions, as you talk about political courage, your two countries are also an example of countries that joined in the wave of enlargement successfully. It is clear, certainly in Brussels, that the Commission is working on plans and ideas on how to deal with the accession of Ukraine, and that this accession is not going to be a standard accession. Ukraine will not follow the path that the other members did to join. There's talk about membership light. There's talk about accelerated fast track. Yesterday, President Zelensky said there needs to be a specific date. By 2027, Ukraine has to be technically ready, even though there's been no progress because of Hungary this year. And he said in the peace deal, I need a date. Is that something that you go, yes, we need a plan because Ukraine will join sooner and it will happen in the next 1 or 2 years, which no country has ever joined like this. Is that something that you're preparing your mindset for, and Europeans too?
Clearly, enlargement is always a geopolitical decision. I mean, we say it's a merit-based process, which it is. I mean, we also had to do a lot of reforms to join the European Union, but at the end, it was always the geopolitical picture that made us to make this decision. And this is also this time. I think we are, you know, taking it or maybe this is not right to say either everybody's in or everybody's out, because we can do, you know, small countries like Montenegro, Albania, we can move. They have been on the list for so long, and of course Ukraine, for them it is very important because this is what they are fighting for. Now I think we need to also move fast in our decision-making processes if we want to change them, because it can't be that, you know, our candidate countries are doing their homework and then we say, oops, we are not ready, just wait there. So we really need to work on that. But I think my feeling is that the member states are not ready to give a concrete date. There's a lot of work to be done, but I think the priority, the urgent need to move and to show that Ukraine is part of Europe is there.
And President, same question to you, because the Ukrainian president said it very clearly yesterday to us in the press. We need a date in the peace deal, because if there's no specific date, Russia will block it either directly or they will use a third country to not get us in. So we need this date.
Well, first of all, I very much agree with almost all those arguments presented by Kaja, because yes, we understand that we need Ukraine in the European Union, also for the reasons I said. It's not only about the traditional...
With a date.
That's one. And number two, yes, when I was talking with many of heads of state and government in the European Union, I kind of feeling that at this point, as we speak today, here in Munich in February, there is no readiness to accept a date. From our perspective, yes, we want to see Ukraine as soon as possible part of EU. But then EU has always been very creative when it's in real need. And we can find a formula that would probably suit us, but then we also need to address two other issues. Then we need to look at Western Balkans, because here I agree, EU has lost all the credibility in that region. We have been promising so many things in return for reforms, for name change of North Macedonia, for instance. We have been promising membership for long. And if we talk about Ukraine, let's not forget also about Moldova, because yes, that's a small country, but if Ukraine comes in, we can't leave out Moldova out of this. So it's not only about Ukraine anymore, it's about probably the largest unification enlargement, but probably on different rules. And then, yes, indeed, we have to come back to a very serious discussion how the whole management decision-making structure of the European Union is going to look like. About dates, like it or not, I think it's very much tied now to the peace deal. Is there going to be a peace deal or not? If, in all honesty, you ask me today, and we had also the panel yesterday, I don't see that Russia is going to move. And if Russia is not moving, then we are not going to have a deal. I very much applaud the efforts of President Trump, of European leaders, of President Zelensky, but now the ball is in Russian court. If Russia is not moving, then we have to decide, if it's not moving, if there is a country at war, what we do about European enlargement. So can we provide today a specific date? As 27, no. If it's up to me, I would work much to try to find a solution. But I understand President Zelensky, and I think that his appeal needs to be heard at the European Council.
So if you say Russia's not moving, what we should understand is that you say by 2027 is more likely the war is still ongoing, that Ukraine joins?
Frankly, I can't imagine at this point that we are going to have a deal in 2026. If I'm wrong, I will be gladly admitting that everywhere, to all interviews here. If I'm invited back to Munich next year, if I'm wrong, I'm glad. But I don't see any signs that Russians want to sign a deal that is, frankly, even if we think about Ukraine, that it's not going to be very just, but for Russians, to some extent, it may be a disaster. If that's the case, we have, if we have a peace deal, then yes, we need to have a date. But then we have another dilemma, and that's why Europe is not at the table. We are talking about European decisions, and that's a completely different discussion.
Just as a final word, I know, of course, by allusion...
We don't argue with geography and with airplanes, right? Let me just say that the focus on Ukraine is the right focus. And what we have been saying, pressure to Russia, if it doesn't continue, we fail. Support to Ukraine, if we don't continue and strengthen in certain areas, our deterrence will be weakened. What all our intelligence reports are saying, what all of our political analyses are saying, is that Russia will become even more of a danger after the war ends. You look at their military production, you look at their military reconstitution, all this sends the message that this concept that Russia's foreign policy is about expansion is standard. And this is why the investment in our defense, and this is why investment in our production very much, will continue to be the priority. And here you are absolutely right. We need to say that defense spending and defense production is increasing across the board. Support to Ukraine, we also need more burden sharing when it comes to support to Ukraine. And these are all issues that require implementation and action, but we will stick to the same words and the same three priorities. And
Well,
forgive me.
Thank you very much, and I know you must go, so please a round of applause to Madam Sekerinska. Thank you very much.
I think I'm on the same plane.
We're on the same plane? Okay. Exactly. So we need to also deal with the logistics, but we are going to open the floor for questions. So if you have a question to address to them, please, now it's the time with microphone. Yes, of course.
Hello, my name is Terry Reinke. I'm a member of the European Parliament. Mr. President, you just made it look a little bit as if we first need to do the enlargement procedure and then we can talk about reforms. But isn't it actually the other way around? Isn't it that in the European Union we urgently need to reform the treaties in order to make enlargement more tangible and more reachable at the moment? And now you're going to tell me, yeah, but it's very difficult to find unanimity on any kind of reform for the treaties at the moment. Well, there is an election coming up in Hungary, not so quite soon. Isn't there a window of opportunity after that to actually speak about what we can do in order to reform the treaties and make enlargement more possible? And wouldn't it be on the member states to come up with a tangible plan? Speaking as a parliamentarian, we have worked on, after the conference on the future of Europe, on making proposals. We have so far not really gotten a credible reply from the Council. So wouldn't it be on the member states to come up with a plan, because we urgently need to be ready to act as a European Union, and for that we need to reform how we work today.
Well, thank you very much. I would caution that both Olympic Games or any championships and elections sometimes produce very unexpected results. Let's not jump ahead of the curve. Let's not assume something that only voters in each of our countries can decide.
And Orban said yesterday, my job is still not done.
No, that applies to all democratic countries. We have election process and you have sometimes surprises. So let's wait till things happen and let's see how they happen. That's number one. Number two, frankly, I do not believe that we can right now open treaty negotiations that most probably are not going to close for many different reasons. You outlined one country, but then across the board you are going to get very different interests. Where I see a room, and I was then in General Affairs Council when we were studying all the proposals and we were talking about the ideas, that most of things can be done, and here I agree very much with Kaja Kallas, most of things can be done within existing legal framework of the European Union. The problem sometimes is that for that or another reason, we simply don't want to push too far. You remember that famous European Council meeting where a leader went out to drink a coffee and he came back, a decision was made and it was done. So from that point of view, I would say...
Now the court says should not have been paid also.
Yeah, well, that's how we work. But frankly, where I agree with you that also for those countries that want to join the EU, it would be only fair to understand how the model is working. And if you have not 27, but let's say 30 plus countries, if everyone who is the candidate at one point becomes EU member state, then probably we are coming to a serious discussion. But I'm very realistic. First, I can't see, and I know the European Parliament's position, but I can't see how at this point, where we have also elections coming in France next year, we also have elections coming in Poland next year, we have some other elections. 13 elections, thank you. And if we put that already in the complicated situation, I'm a rather cautious politician, always have been. I think we would lose everything. And I would very much agree with my great friend who actually comes from Estonia, now in a European job, that we can do a lot of things without opening treaties, number one. Number two, let's do those things without putting those great slogans that not all people like Federal Europe or something. But we can achieve much more. And we sometimes do that without much fuss.
Well, thank you so much. The schedule is tight for the two of them, so perhaps we have time for two final questions, briefly if possible, and then we'll come to an end. Thank you. The gentleman here, and then yes.
Yes, Michael Gahler, also member of the European Parliament and the Ukraine rapporteur. I mean, this debate about this date for Ukraine for a membership that comes, of course, from the dire need to have, with a whatever ceasefire or other deal, to have a credible security guarantee. And my question then is, I mean, that is a bit thinking out of the box, and it is reflected in some of these reflections. I wouldn't even say public discussions, but reflections ongoing, saying, well, perhaps we might, so to say, make them a member, but activate only this chapter, which contains the 42.7. Is that, it would also require, of course, unanimity, and perhaps this leader who went for coffee is voted out in 2 months and can have his coffee at home. But my question is that a thinkable option, or is it still, rather than, because we will not get unanimity, a relevant coalition of the willing who would apply, in a way, in kind, a 42.7 guarantee?
Okay, very quickly, and then if I'm a Ukrainian and I ask you, okay, and what's in it for me? I'll be protecting Europe, I'll have my army, and so what's the benefit of being there and not getting all what EU is offering? If I'm President Zelensky, I'm not speaking on his behalf, I would reject that, and I think that Ukrainian people would reject that. Yeah, but when? And then you need still a clear plan, and then you have all the issues. Now, I would say that this needs to be a very creative thinking where we already have committed a lot of money, and that's where Europe can be proud of itself. Let's not bash ourselves where we should not. And we have done much more than one could imagine just a day before Russia invaded Ukraine. I was then seeing that thing happening. But I would say that we need to find then how we rebuild Ukraine's economy, how we help them to restructure their management, and they need also to have a kind of decision-making power also at the table.
And perhaps now time for a final question. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Karsten Friis. I'm at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. So this is about agency, and the problem for Europe has always been that we have all these investments and initiatives and spend money, but we don't manage to channel it into political agency. That's why we're not at the table when it comes to Ukraine, in my view. But now we're seeing it is coffee break solutions, the A3s, the A5, the Weimars, and all that. But they indicate there's a weakness, isn't it, in the highest political level in Europe, how to do strategic decision-making. So my simple question is, do we need to make, for instance, the E3 permanent? Make the E3, for instance, or highest level political decision-making. Do we need a new political levels, permanent decision-making structure?
I agree with President here that there are tools in the treaties. We need the political courage to use them, and I have experienced this myself, saying that I have all these countries that are proposing how we can work, what kind of methods we can use, and then I say, fine, let's take this decision and use now the methods that we have agreed, or like you're proposing. Oh, but not this decision. So I think the urgency maybe is not there for everybody, or the understanding of the urgency. Now, we have 27 countries in Europe with 27 different historical backgrounds as well. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, I'm sorry, I honor my E3 colleagues very much, but if you think about 2014 and the agreements that were done, there was not really an understanding of Russia, and that's why it went wrong. Now, and coming to the question that we are not at the table, we are not at the table because the Russians really see that they get what they haven't achieved militarily. They hope that they get this diplomatically at the negotiation table, and Americans will deliver this to them. Now, we Europeans, we can't agree to these things. Now, there comes a point where also Russians understand that the things that they actually need or think that the Americans will deliver are dependent on Europe. So we shouldn't be the demandeurs that, take us to the table, but we should discuss what we want to achieve when we are at the table. And that's why I say we have seen a lot of concessions, a lot of pressure on Ukraine, and of course it's easy because they are the weaker part. Why don't you just surrender and give them what they want and we will have peace? We already had that, and what we had more wars. So this is time where we have to respond to the maximalist demands that Russia is presenting, also with the demands on their side. Because if we want a sustainable peace, then we need concessions also from the Russian side. And the things that they need, lifting of the sanctions, frozen assets, all this is European decision. If we don't, just agree to whatever America is negotiating, then, you need to talk to us.
And we have to end the session very soon, but to that extent, High Representative, there's all of this debate around this Russian envoy, and even names that are being floated, but it seems to me the Europeans cannot even agree on the mandate for this envoy. Is this about going to the Kremlin and talking to Vladimir Putin? Is this the table? It seems there's a lot of piling up on things that already exist. There's already a top diplomat.
Yeah, that's why I propose to the member states, concrete, mandate, the asks that we would have to Russia. So whoever goes to that table, whether it's individually or like bilaterally, then they should also ask these things from the Russians. So it would be very clear that this, I bring you one example. We have a saying in Estonian that, if you demand a lot, you get little. If you demand little, you get nothing. And if you demand nothing, you pay on top. So
keep it in mind. President, just a final word perhaps on this as a conclusion to sum up.
On what? On
Choose your, we've talked about this date for Ukraine, this Russian envoy, this very complex political structure. It seems ultimately to reflect the question of our guest. It's a question of just figuring out a structure, how to make decisions faster. Is it the two-speed Europe? Is it Mario Draghi? Something's got to give ultimately.
Okay, I think that to some point we need to understand that on many issues, we are much better than we sometimes critically think. That sometimes needs to be simply acknowledged. And we have been very efficient helping Ukraine. Yes, we have had discussions that we should do more, but we have been able to do that. We have been able to manage many financial crises and some other challenges. What we currently need is probably not so much, and here I agree with all the panelists who said, not so much listen to what other people outside of Europe think of us, but simply to work so that we become strong and credible negotiating partner. And another thing, there is temptation. Coming to your question about E3, as a German, I can understand. As a German, you can probably be happy about that. I'm coming from the small country, would say no. There are so many dangers, but where the point is that we have been always able to find solutions, and we have been always able to move when we understand sense of urgency, and I think that we understand this sense of urgency, and we will work out everything. It will be painful, it will create a lot of discussions, but I'm quite optimistic.
Well, thank you very much, and we have reached the end of the session. Thank you very much to President Rinkiewicz, and thank you very much to Madam Kaja Kallas. Thank you very much.